coming. This is our last Courage to Speak presentation of the semester, but it's not our last presentation. We have our Fulbright scholar, Chenray Feng, will be presenting, and Awista O will be here with two students from Afghanistan on the 27th. Is that correct? If you haven't heard Awista speak, she's remarkable. She's really wonderful. But I want to focus, if I could, on tonight's presentation. I want to tell you the story about how I actually came to know Michele. I am an editor of the Politics and Environment series, of which Poisons on Our Plates is an important contribution to that series. My editor-in-chief sent me a note, I don't know if you know this, Michele, saying last weekend I had yet again another horrible case of food poisoning going out to dinner. I really would like to do something on environmental issues regarding food safety. I thought, I think I know how. I have just the person, and it was Michele. In summer of 2007, as many of you know, we hosted a United Nations, NATO, and US EPA conference on environmental challenges and human security. And Michele made a major contribution to that conference and for subsequent major book publication on environmental issues for those living in rather depressed areas of Appalachia. Why I was so proud of that contribution is because it's the first time in something like a European volume we're talking about issues of Americans in Appalachia. And it really was a remarkable contribution. I really don't have a long introduction because this presentation and her work in this book speak for themselves. I just wanted to read you briefly part of my introduction. Michele Morrone's work is meticulously researched and immensely readable, and it really is a wonderful book to read. And will broaden and deepen the Politics and Environment series significantly. Although one could easily be sent reeling from the grotesque horrors that Morrone describes with precision, there's a light touch as well to the work that makes for a compelling, powerful narrative. Indeed, just as the book Fast Food Nation and the film Supersize Me had a profound impact on the way people view the convenience as well as the dangers of fast food, Morrone points to the abuse and risk that surround what we commonly believe are safe nutritional practices. As she underscores throughout the work, the dangers of pandemic, influenza, bacteria, and viruses are far more threatening and direct than the risk of terrorism or nuclear war. Environmentalists often predict that an apocalypse is coming. The earth will heat up like a greenhouse. We will run out of energy. Overpopulation will lead to starvation and war. Nuclear winter will devastate all organic life. We have, of course, grown desensitized to many such prophecies of doom. Yet, as this work suggests with brilliant clarity, the real danger is already here at dinner time. Please welcome Michele Morrone.
I am really hungry. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. What I'm going to do tonight is talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of things to talk about when it comes to food and food safety. And it was really difficult for me to narrow this down and not to try to do everything. So I'm sorry if I'm missing stuff that you would come, maybe you wanted to hear about tonight. So if there's something I missed, please feel free to bring it up when it comes time for Q&A. So I am going to start by asking you to help me out a little bit, not with this quote, but this is kind of the origin of everything that I've ever done in my academic career, research career, really goes back to this quote. And this quote is, "The risks that kill people and the risks that alarm people are completely different." So I read this quote in 2001, even though I have been working in environmental risk perception and environmental issues for a number of years. I worked with Ohio EPA for about 7 years before I went to Ohio University. But this is just fascinating to me. And I saw that and I thought, why is that? I'm going to assume that just about everybody in this room today got in a car at some point. And did you think about your risk of maybe not getting out of that car, when you got to, or before you got to your destination? Because you all know that that's one of the biggest risks you take on a daily basis. You get into a car and drive. But why are some of us more afraid of flying than we are of driving? Even though the probability of having a major accident in an airplane is much less than the probability of having an accident at home. So this really is the basis for all of my work, is trying to understand that and get into that. Why are people afraid of some things and not afraid of others? So let's take a look at food. So safe foods. When you see that, safe, somebody give me a word, safe. What's safe?
Healthy.
Healthy, okay, that's a good one. Nothing, okay. What else? Clean, okay. What else?
Okay.
Okay, all right, let's see what I got here. I have whole, right? When you see that word, organic, right? You think, most people think safe, whole, organic. Maybe there's some of you that don't think that, but in general, whole, organic. Local? Safe? That's not safe? Fresh? So some of these words may conjure up to you, say food. Now, what about scary foods? What's scary? All right, let me throw some up here and see if this is what you're thinking. You're just afraid to mention now. Genetically modified. Scary, right? Scary. There was just, I was listening to the radio on the way yesterday from Ohio, and they were talking about Germany has banned genetically modified corn. They're not going to allow Monsanto to deliver their genetically modified corn. They're not going to plant it in Germany. How about this one? Irradiated. Scary, right? Scary food. There's strawberries that are irradiated here. Adulterated, contaminated. Those are scary terms for food, right? Most people would agree with that. All right, now, the scariest foods. And this is where some of you may be a little surprised. I'm going to keep track of my time, so that's why I'm going to keep looking at my phone, because that's my clock. And hopefully it won't rain, because if it rains, then I'll have trouble raining. I won't answer, I promise. All right, so scariest foods. Hamburgers? Tofu. Tofu? Is that a scary food? What's up with that? How about cut melon? It's a scary food. Oh, is that a scary food? Baked potatoes? Gravy? Rice? Would you all think of these? Maybe hamburgers, right? Do you think of these as being scary foods? Well, I think of these as being scary foods, and this is why. I am not a microbiologist, but I've become very familiar with this curve right here. This is a curve of bacterial growth and how bacteria grows exponentially over time. So if you look at the horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is growth of bacteria. Now those foods that I just had up are actually identified by the federal government as being potentially hazardous foods. And they're potentially hazardous because if you fool around with them and keep them sitting out for too long a time in a room temperature environment, the bacteria is going to enter this phase and grow exponentially very quickly. So if you leave tofu sitting out at room temperature, you've created a really nice environment for bacteria to grow, to enter that log phase. So the government says those foods that I just listed, tofu, cut melon, hamburgers, gravy, rice, you need to be careful with those. You need to monitor the temperature and not let them sit out at room temperature for long periods of time. Otherwise, you could have massive bacterial growth, which could make you sick. Could make you sick. Okay, now we know a lot about bacteria. And the reason we know a lot about bacteria is because there have been people studying bacteria for hundreds of years. And as I was writing the book, I had a different vision for the book than the way it actually came out. And as I started writing it, I started to learn about people, and there were all men, that were studying bacteria and were paving the way for our current understanding of microbiology. And I just found some of their stories fascinating. And I'm going to try to share a few of the more, what I perceive to be interesting stories with you on a couple of the pathogens. We have known about bacteria and how they can make us sick for a really long time. So just looking at one specific bacteria, and that's Clostridium botulinum. And that's the bacteria that causes botulism. It's a spore-forming bacteria, and it likes to live in canned foods. This is the reason why you need to, when you're home canning, you need to sterilize everything. Clostridium botulinum is everywhere in the environment, so it's a naturally occurring organism. The first case of botulism was documented in 1735 from people eating sausage. First documented case of botulism. And then in 1804, food canning began. And once we started canning food, we created this environment that the botulism bacteria really love, because they can really thrive without oxygen. They're an anaerobic bacteria. So we create the situation in a can, and then we leave it at room temperature, other thing that bacteria really love, and it enters that log phase. And when I started to really get into food safety, I finally understood why every time I went to the grocery store with my mom, she would inspect those cans. And if the can was dented or bulgy or anything like that, she would put it down. I'm not buying that. Now I understand why. It's because her mother must have told her, look, when we can, if there's could be bacteria or something in there, we don't want it. Because the bacteria grows in the can and then can make the can bigger. Okay, in 1820, there was the first documented botulism outbreak. There was about 34 people at a funeral, and first time a bunch of people got sick and they tied it to one bacteria. And then in 1895, the bacteria that caused the botulism outbreak was actually discovered. So people were sick, we had identified it in food, and now they actually labeled it as the bacteria was discovered. In 1904, we had our first canned food outbreak in the United States. In 1946, it was weaponized, so it now is being used and can be used as a bioterrorism weapon. And in 1960s, it was recognized as possible therapy because it is a neurotoxin. And now, so the same botulism bacteria that we can ingest and can kill you pretty quickly, some people use it for cosmetic, same bacteria. So it's come that far. So we know a lot about botulism and bacteria in general, and one reason we know a lot about bacteria is because of this man right here, Robert Koch. And he was the first microbiologist, and he's the one that helped us understand about botulism and about bacteria in general. And what he did was he developed a technique known as culturing, where you can take organisms and grow them in a petri dish, essentially. And he helped us today. We still use his criteria or his 4 postulates whenever we're trying to identify the cause of an outbreak. Because what he says here, very logically, is that, look, if you want to know what is causing an outbreak, you've got to get a sample. You got to get a sample, you got to try to grow it in a lab, you got to put that sample into some other organism like a lab rat, and you got to see if they get sick. Makes perfect sense. And that's what we do today in environmental health. The biggest problem is getting a sample. That's the biggest problem. Because a lot of times it's quite sensitive for people to give you a sample of what we need a sample of, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? So it's kind of difficult. So we know we have to do to pinpoint what type of bacteria virus is causing illness. And we use the work done in the early 1800s to help us with this. Another man that was very influential in our current understanding of food is Theodore Estrich. Estrich. Does that sound familiar at all? Estrich. Remember this? Theodore Estrich was a pediatrician, and he was working with children, and he was really concerned about the levels of diarrhea in the children who were in orphanages. So he took samples of the children's diarrhea and discovered a bacteria in the diarrhea. And that bacteria is what we know today as Escherichia coli, or E. coli. This was something that really was interesting to me, is that most of the pathogens that make us sick today are named after these guys. So that's something you aspire, you know, if you're a microbiologist, to have something that causes diarrhea named after you. Theodore Estrich is the reason we know about E. coli. And I wanted to just remind you, maybe some people here have been affected by E. coli, of some of the unlikely suspects for E. coli contamination. And people have been sickened from E. coli in things like spinach and sprouts in recent years. Anybody here not hear about the spinach outbreak? See, I was telling Peter, when you ask people in Ohio, eat a lot of beef, there's not a lot of spinach eaters in Ohio. But I knew this would be a different audience. Everybody in here eats spinach, right? We didn't have, you know, that much in Ohio. But the spinach outbreak was really interesting. I got to meet and talk with the epidemiologists who were at the right on ground zero when it was they were trying to figure out, how did the spinach get contaminated? Well, what happened was there was one major farm involved, and this is what a spinach farm looks like nowadays. This farm that was involved in about mid-1990s was farming. It was a small farm, had 2.5 acres. 2.5 acres of spinach. By the mid-2000s, they were farming 37,000 acres of spinach. So what happened was, and this is what the public health officials determined was the cause of the spinach outbreak. And I heard this right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. You just cannot keep track of all of 37,000 acres. So they set up stakeouts around the spinach, and they watched as pigs climbed under, you know, their electric fences and jumped over fences and went into the spinach fields. So right now that's their best guess how that spinach got contaminated. It must be feral pigs getting into the fields. So the spinach outbreak was a really good example of a lot of things. One is about how a pathogen like E. coli that we commonly associate with ground beef can make us sick from eating produce. You know, that we're not safe from E. coli just because we're vegetarians, right? We're not safe. We could still get it from spinach or sprouts, and I can talk about sprouts if people have questions about that later. And the other thing was, it showed one of the problems that we have with our food system. Because just like some of you here with a McDonald's hamburger, beef could come from hundreds of cows to get into that one hamburger. Well, when you buy a bag of spinach, it can come from a whole bunch of different farms. And it's shipped to one place and pulled together so that if you've got one little area of spinach, right here, it's the only place that had E. coli, and then we ship it out, next thing you know, this right here is in 600 bags of spinach. So it's the same type of situation with spinach as it is with your hamburgers, mass production. Okay, so this is how our government is, and I'm going to come back to how our government is protecting us from pathogens in our food. This is how we have managed produce. The government has a safety action plan. So this is what we need to do to keep our produce safe. They also have guidance, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about guidance because this is something that the government relies a lot on when it comes to keeping food safe. And then they have a whole bunch of initiatives. They actually have a tomato safety initiative, a leafy greens initiative, and a lettuce safety initiative. But when it comes right down to it, you are responsible for what you put in your mouth. And you can't really, just because there's a tomato safety initiative, doesn't mean that tomato you're eating is free of pathogens. You as a consumer need to be educated, and you need to take responsibility for your own food. And the government is doing what they can. And I'm not going to slam the government because, and that'll become clearer as I get towards the end of the talk here. They're doing what they can with what they have. But this is how we've managed produce, with guidance initiatives. That's our policy. Okay, scary food continuum. What is scary right now? Scary.
Pistachio.
Peanuts, right? Pistachios. The scariest foods, peanut butter. Oh my gosh. You believe it? Peanut butter sandwiches. Peanut butter. To date, 691 cases of illness associated with eating peanut products. It's in 46 states. There's more than 2,800 products involved, and there are 4,000, almost 4,000 recall items. Has anybody been on the FDA website and looked at the recall list? 3 or 4 people out of, I don't know, 80 or so, 100? We'll come back to that later. Recalls. Now this shows why, this is another really good example of why our food safety, why we should be alarmed by things like peanut butter and spinach. Because no longer are we concerned about people getting diarrhea from eating food that's been sitting out too long at a church supper or at one specific school. Now, because of our distribution system, we've got it everywhere. 5 cases in Rhode Island. It's the latest numbers from CDC. The number of cases confirmed salmonella that's been associated to eating peanut butter and peanut products as of March 15th. Now let's take a look at salmonella. This is Daniel's salmon, who salmonella is named after. I have to admit, this is kind of an attractive man. This story is really interesting. When I was looking at the salmonella stuff in the book, I was just, wow, this is cool. But you might not find it cool, but I found it cool. So Daniel Salmon, he had a bachelor's degree only. He never got an MD or a PhD or anything like that. And he was the first, he got involved in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He was kind of like a political appointee in the early 1900s. And when he was setting up this lab at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, doing veterinary work with animals and veterinary and looking at how disease spreads in animals, he contacted, it was Cornell University, and said, you know what, I need a lab assistant. Can you give me an idea? Can you send me somebody who's good at being a lab, to work in the lab? And he ended up with this man right here, Theobald Smith. And Theobald Smith, brilliant microbiologist. He had an MD. I think he went to Albany. Some of these biographical information is escaping me. But the key thing is that Theobald discovered the bacteria that causes salmonella. But Daniel Salmon, in the tradition that a lot of senior faculty took a lot of the work that Smith did and touted it as his own. So when Salmon presented the bacteria, it ultimately got named after him. So now, going back to that, would you like to have diarrhea, pathogen-caused diarrhea named after you? Who won here? Now, Salmon got it named after him, but Smith is actually the one who discovered the pathogen. So Smith's the winner, you think, yeah. But that was really, just that whole story between the two of them. Smith ended up really despising salmon, and ultimately Salmon was discredited on the witness stand in Montana during this trial about arsenic. But it was just a fascinating read to see what was going on. And reading some of his diaries, Smith's diaries, he would write to his wife about how he detested salmon and how salmon was taking all of his work and touting it as his own. History has been very kind to Smith. And when he died, his obituary said something like, all men are his debtors, because of the work that he ended up doing subsequently, and then his discovery of salmonella as well. Okay, we may have more information about salmonella than we did before the 1900s. And really getting into researching salmonella, there was some work done in the 1990s where archaeologists, anthropologists, dug up some bones in Greece, and they identified these skeletal remains as people who were living through the plague of Athens that was going on in 480 to 430 BC, something like that. And they examined the skeletal tissue for pathogens, and they were looking for anthrax, they were looking for botulism, and of the 5 different pathogens. And the only pathogen they found in every single skeleton they dug up was the salmonella bacteria. So then you go back and you look at the main historical account of the plague of Athens, and this was going on when Socrates was around, and some of the great architectural structures were being built in Greece, and the Peloponnesian War was all about. I'm not a historian, but I did learn about this when I was writing the book. And Thucydides was this aristocrat that was walking around Athens recording observations. And this is his observation, some of his observations, compared to how the CDC describes salmonella. So number one, people in good health were all of a sudden attacked by violent heats in the head. CDC says most persons infected with salmonella develop diarrhea, fever, and abdominal cramps 12 to 17 hours after. So it's kind of neat. A couple of other quotes. Thucydides, in his diaries, said the body, meanwhile, did not waste away so long as the distemper was at its height, but held out to a marvel against its ravages, so that when they succumbed, as in most cases in the 7th or 8th day, to the internal inflammation, they had still some strength in them. Translated, illness usually lasts 4 to 7 days, and most persons recover without treatment. It's 430 BC, 2009. And then the last one, which really, you've got these skeletal remains, and then you've got the 2 descriptions. And even where it did not prove mortal, it still left its mark on the extremities, for it settled in the privy parts. The fingers and the toes, and many escaped with the loss of these, some too with that of their eyes. CDC says a small number of persons with salmonella develop pain in their joints, irritation of the eyes, and painful urination. So even without the skeletal remains, I think there could be, the same thing that happened in the plague of Athens, salmonella. Salmonella now has been associated with chronic joint pain and arthritis. It's one of the things that salmonella is known for. Okay, how safe is safe? How safe is safe? Well, this is now getting into kind of the policy part of it. This is how we have managed our food safety system in this country, largely. We use goals and guidance. We use inspections. We use the recall system. And we use education. There are laws and regulations. So you're like, well, what about the laws and regulations? Well, those laws and regulations do exist. But this is the main approach that we take in this country to ensure that when you eat that hamburger, eat that spinach, that it's as safe as it can possibly be. Let's just take a look at each one of these just briefly and talk about the pros and cons, or the challenges and opportunities with each one of them. And this kind of goes back to, I don't want to slam the government for not keeping our food safe, but I want you to get my understanding of the limitations that the government has. Okay, first of all, goals and guidance. So I just took 4 key points. Healthy People 2010 is a public health doctrine. And in 1990, the Surgeon General put together these goals. Healthy People 2000 is what it was called in 1990. We want all Americans to have this level of health, and it covers everything from tobacco use to prenatal care, to mental health, to oral hygiene. Everything is in this document, and there are goals associated with all of these public health issues. And of course, there's an environment section, and of course, there's a food safety section as well. These are 4 of the goals. Oh, in 2000, the Surgeon General updated it with more targets for 2010. Okay, so these are 4 of the food safety targets that were agreed on in 2000 that we would try to reach in 2010 in this country, okay, by the Surgeon General. Reduce infections, and there's key pathogens. There's 4 of them that they wanted to do. We'll look at this in a second. Increase the proportion of consumers who follow food safety practices. Maybe we'll take a poll here and see how many of you have a working thermometer in your kitchen. Do you know how to calibrate your thermometer? There'd probably be less. So I just looked the other day, and CDC just issued their report on food, and they have said that none of the Healthy People 2010 targets for reduction of foodborne pathogens were reached in 2008. So this is the data that they have. The CDC has about 10 or 12 cities in the country where they actually get definitive numbers of the amount of foodborne illness. The rest of it's just estimated. So with their 10 to 12 cities or so, these are the numbers that they have gathered. And the numbers in the cells here are numbers of illness per 100,000 population. So if you look at salmonella, for instance, in 1997, they documented at their sampling sites around the country 13.7 documented cases of salmonella per 100,000 people. Their goal for 2010 is half that, a little bit more than half that, 6.8. 2008 was kind of a good year if you're a salmonella, bad year if you're somebody who had the illness, right? 16.20 cases of salmonella, and that amounts to about 7,500 cases of documented cases of salmonella in the United States. There's a big difference between documented and actual. Because anybody in here, last time you had diarrhea, did you call the health department? Anybody? Yeah, see? So we got a problem with the way we estimate foodborne illness. We base it on these cities that actually collect the data. So it could be way more than this, but this is what they get. So we're not reaching our goals. It's 2009. I'm suspecting we may have more of a problem this year, but everything is to be seen. So that's goals and guidance. That's one way we do it. We set these goals, and we say, now, go accomplish them. Go forth and accomplish the goals. Okay, inspections. That's the next way that we work on trying to ensure that your food is safe. Here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky, because we have 3 levels of government that are involved in inspections. We have the federal government. I'm going to talk about the FDA in just a second. Then we have the state. And every state almost, I don't know about Rhode Island, has a health department. Rhode Island health department? Yeah, every state has a health department. Some states have a health department and an environmental agency. I should have looked in my audience. And then the local health departments. Do you have county health departments? Rhode Island? Just state? You don't have a local health department, city health department? It's just both. All right. In Ohio, I can tell you that we have a state health department. There's 88 counties in Ohio, and there are 125 local health departments. Every county has its own health department, and then some of the bigger counties, where Cincinnati is, Cleveland, Columbus, the cities have their health departments. So look at the jurisdictional issues. Well, if you're in Columbus, we've got Columbus Public Health, but as soon as you step outside of Columbus, you've got the township health department, then the county, and then we got the state. Okay, who's in charge of this restaurant? I don't know, let's just skip it. You know, that might be, maybe that's what they do. We've got all these layers of inspection. Now let's just take a look at the FDA. The FDA is not the only federal agency responsible for inspections, by the way. USDA is responsible for inspecting food service facilities as well. Let's just take a look at the FDA. In 2007, a science advisory board of the FDA wrote a report on the state of the FDA. These are some of the words that were in that report. They were talking about the FDA, and they said the state of the FDA, it's a dangerous situation. It's an agency in peril. It's badly crippled, and there's an appallingly low inspection rate. That's what, this was big, big news. Because this was FDA's own science advisors. They were criticizing themselves, essentially. And this report was scathing, absolutely scathing. Now, FDA is responsible for inspecting a lot of things, not just food. They do cosmetics, too. And they do drugs. They've got a lot of stuff to do. But if you take a look at some of the information that could go into that badly crippled, appallingly low inspection rate, I went and I looked at FDA workforce numbers, just from 1988 to 2007. And you can see that in 1988, FDA had a total workforce of 7,039 people. That's the closest I could find based on the information that they have in their budget. In 2007, they had about 800 more. So in that 19-20 year time frame, about 800 more people. While they added 800 people, they reduced their food safety workforce from 3,082 in 1988 to 2,782. Now, do you think the food system in this country got less complicated or more complicated from 1988 to 2007? Got way more complicated, right? Way more complicated. And the agency's staff was reduced. So it's no wonder they're not doing the inspections they should be doing, or that the public expects them to do. Now, the promo for this talk tonight said something about imports, and I don't really have a lot to say about imports, but I'll say something because maybe that's why some of you came tonight, wasn't talking about imports. But the numbers I've seen on imports suggest that about 60% of our total food supply in this country is imported. And of the produce that we eat, about 75% of the produce is imported. And the number that I saw in terms of the percentage of imports that are inspected by the FDA, 1%. Those are the numbers I've seen. And that's pretty much all I can say about imports. Well, I can say other stuff about it, but that's all I'm going to say about it. So we had an understanding of why the ports are valued, but they don't have the workforce. And then the other thing you look at is, here's what happens. This is going on with the peanut butter thing. People get upset, and the elected officials go, what is FDA doing? Why aren't they doing this stuff? Why aren't they doing the inspections? Why aren't they keeping our food safe? Well, let's ask Congress why that's not happening. Okay, so from 2000, I looked at the laws enacted in 2007 that required the FDA to do something new. The number of laws in 2007 enacted new laws. This is something new for the FDA to do. Here's the law, Congress signs it, see you later. 125 new laws, okay, 2007. Now the number of new laws in 2007 requiring the FDA to do something new that the Congress said, here's some money to accomplish this. How many? You're exactly right. 0. It's so easy to write a law. It's so easy. They write the laws and they, all right, public's off my back, let's move on. But FDA, they reduce the workforce, they don't have the resources. So, you know, we can criticize the FDA, but there's a lot more criticism that can go around. And we can criticize Congress. Let's start that now. Okay, recalls, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about recalls. Oh, as luck would have it, I was just thinking yesterday, I wonder how the public feels about recalls. And I got a sense in here a few minutes ago, and I said, how many of you have looked at the recall list for peanut products? This report just came out yesterday from Rutgers, and I put the website there for you to go look at it yourself if you like. I just skimmed it over because I was looking at it late last night. But this is what, they surveyed about 1,000 Americans, asking them about what they know about the recall system in this country. If when there's a recall, they go to their cupboard and see if they have those products there, those types of things. And what they found was that the survey suggests, the results, that American public, you know, they hear about the recall and most of them don't take action. Most of them don't, and we see in here that you ought to look at the recall list. Maybe you just threw everything away that had peanuts in it. You didn't even, I'm not gonna look at the recall list. The thing about recalls, and a lot of people don't know, is that when it comes to food, recalls are voluntary. The government does not have the authority to force Peanut Corporation of America to recall food. They have the authority when it comes to consumer products. Like if there's a drawstring in a fleece jacket that might strangle somebody, they can force those manufacturers. Remember the whole tire thing a couple years ago where the tires were recalled on automobiles? They do that. When it comes to food, the government does not have the authority to force a recall. They call the company and say, no, it looks like your products are making people, maybe you should, well, what's going to make a company do a recall, right? Did you all know the Peanut Corporation of America filed bankruptcy? And now if you have a claim or if you want to, sue, there's no way you can ever get any money from them now. They filed bankruptcy in February. So the recall system is a way that, we rely on that, but it's really not working, in my opinion. Education is the last tool that we use. These are some of the campaigns. Fight Back. You can go online and find any of these. A lot of these are really targeted to kids. Fight Back is fight bacteria. Thermi, it's a thermometer, a heart rate thermometer. The National Food Safety Education Month is, when is it? Okay, it's in September, right? Okay, it's September. And then of course we have labeling, all right? So the last time you bought a package of chicken. Last time you bought a package of chicken, did you look at the label? Yeah. Anybody look at the label when you bought a package? I did. Okay, and what does it say about? What does the label say about keeping your chicken safe? Okay, there's the date, but then there's that government label, that really fine print that you gotta go, what does that say? Okay, see how effective we've been on that whole labeling thing? That was, slap a label on it, it's safe. And when you go look at your meat, there's that safe handling instructions. That's on every package of meat. That's how we do education. So some of our education techniques they leave a lot to be desired. Okay, health education. Again, going back to that first slide, I'm really interested why people are afraid of some things that aren't going to kill you and they're afraid of things that are going to harm you. So in 2003, I was looking at Ohio University, and I'm in the same department as the faculty who teach the lifestyle, the healthy lifestyle class. It's a gen ed, entry level, covers everything from binge drinking to tobacco use. Everything's in study habits, mental health, depression, that type of thing. So I'm flipping through the book, and I'm like, there's nothing in here on food. Here is, and for those of you who are college students, your mother is not checking your food anymore when you go to college, right? Your mother is not making sure that hamburger is cooked all the way through. You are on your own for the first time, a lot of you, and making sure that what you're eating is safe. So I worked with a colleague, and we surveyed students at OU to find out what they know about food safety. And just looking at hamburgers, we surveyed, I think it was about 750 students at OU. We got to participate in the survey. And almost all of them had eaten hamburger in the last month. And the thing that alarmed us was that almost half of them ate a hamburger that was red or pink inside. They were tasty, right? Why they would eat it? They do. They still eat them. They still eat them. Because, and I do this in my class. We do a really fun thing with hamburgers in my class. And there's some students who just, I'm eating it, no matter what. You can eat a rare hamburger if it's irradiated. Okay? Eat a rare hamburger if it's irradiated. And not worry about getting sick. All right. Last thing I want to leave you with, maybe this will get you thinking. When you're thinking about risk, this is not my definition. This is the definition from those people who had that first quote. Risk is really, to members of the public, a hazard plus an outrage factor. Okay, so the hazard is that probability of harm. Probability. My probability of dying in a car crash is 1 in 10. I don't know if that's the actual probability, but let's just say that's what it is. But you know what? I don't really care about it. I'm not really that outraged about it. So to me, it's not that much of a risk for me to get in a car. I don't perceive it as a risk. So it's when the outrage factor or the public perception factor becomes prominent to each individual that you actually perceive it as a risk. Some of you are afraid to eat beef no matter what. Others of you are afraid to eat spinach no matter what. Some of you, the risk from eating beef is greater, and some other of you, the risk of eating spinach. Everybody has their individual risks based on what your outrage factor is. The scientists give us the numbers. We take those numbers and add that outrage. So, pre-peanut butter outbreak, when it comes to food safety issues, this is my non-scientific, these doesn't mean, there's no numbers associated with this. The outrage with peanut butter, or with food safety, was that red. The United States general population outrage was that yellow, or was that red, I'm sorry. People were not as outraged about the spinach outbreak as they are about the peanut butter outbreak. Why is that? Little kids are involved, right? President Obama said, my child eats a peanut butter sandwich 3 times a week. So you start, putting little kids, especially parents, I make my daughter a peanut butter sandwich every day. The whole guilt thing. People weren't outraged. And so what was happening is we were putting, the Congress, government was not really worrying them. They weren't being called by their constituents. We're not going to worry about food safety. We're dealing with bioterrorism, and we're dealing with the economy. Oh, the economy thing, that. And then, so there was no policy change. Now, this is what the outrage level is. It has really shifted, this is my view, because of the peanut butter outbreak. So now, we're talking about a unified food safety agency that's going to combine all the inspection agencies into one, and there's going to be some kind of food safety czar, and we're going to beef up that FDA workforce, which is great for my students because it means they're going to get jobs with no problem. And there's this focus now on food safety. So the risks that scare us, this is one instance where the risks that scare us and the risks that make us sick is the same. And we've gotten to that point now where we're going to probably see some major policy shifts because that outrage component is there. And I'm going to shut up myself there and see what all you all have to say. I think Peter would like to call. You're going to call on people?
Yeah,
or? Okay.
that's okay.
That's fine.
Alyssa, I think you had the first question. Go for it.
Hi. You kind of touched upon this.
Is that
But
mic
it's okay.
on? No, it is. Just hold it up to your mouth.
Okay. I think you talked about it a little bit, but in your book and today you discussed that there's obviously a lack of government involvement, and I was curious to know if that's due to an ignorance to the problem, or if, as you discussed, it's economic reasons, or it's a combination of factors.
Well, now this is my opinion based on my research. I think the weakness in government, and the question was about a weakness of government protecting us from things in our food. The problem, there's a lot of problems, but from my perspective, the biggest problem is that we collectively as a society weren't really that concerned about it. We have other things occupying our mind, other things we're afraid of. So we didn't call our congressional representatives and say, you have to do something. And unless we get scared enough collectively to call and make our elected officials do something, the result is going to be that there's not going to be that government focus and resources to the issue. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes.
Okay. Can I do that?
We'll bring the microphone.
Bring my just
Just a second.
winter in South Carolina, Turtle Beach. We were almost 17 years there. For the past 10 years, nobody, and I say nobody, can have a raw hamburger there. They passed a rule in the state of South on their own, nothing to do with federal. You want a hamburger, you're going to get a low cooked with it, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I did want to say, in Rhode Island, I've known quite a few people that in Toledo go to restaurants without appointments. They just walk in on people and make sure the restaurants are clean, make sure the meat's clean. So they do a pretty good job here on that alone, you know. Just wanted to.
Are those government inspectors or are those?
That's state.
Oh, the state.
That's
Okay.
state.
So I thought it was maybe a citizen vigilante.
I was amazed at that in South Carolina. They stuck to it.
Well, you know what? We were talking about the no rare hamburgers in South Carolina. If you go to restaurants and you look at menus, maybe some of you've seen this about the raw eggs, raw egg products. There's warnings now on a lot of menus, and that's from the federal government. The federal government, going back to salmonella, they don't want anybody eating undercooked eggs anymore. Because there has been research that has provided evidence that salmonella can get into the yolk of the egg through the shell. So they don't want you eating undercooked eggs unless they're pasteurized. So if you're going to a fine dining establishment, there's like hollandaise sauce or something like that, or Caesar salad dressing that's made with a raw egg, there should be a warning on the menu about the raw eggs. So it's separate from hamburgers.
Right back here.
I just had a question about going off the raw food thing. Have you ever done any research on how safe sushi would be or something like that?
How safe what is?
Sushi would be a lot of people are afraid of it because it's raw. Is it any unsafer than normal foods or?
Okay, the things I know about sushi, it's not sushi specific, but it's raw seafood. And when I was researching the book, I did look at pathogens in raw seafood, and a lot of our seafood is imported. But the guidance that you get from food safety professionals on that is you should be sure that your sushi chef is, I guess there's some kind of credential that they can get, that they're a credentialed sushi chef. That's what I'm going to say, isn't it? Sushi chef. And that you have an understanding of where the seafood is coming from. Because there's some stuff you can eat, fish you can eat raw that can kill you like that. So be really, really careful.
Plus the mercury.
What was that?
Mercury too.
Oh, well, mercury is yeah, that's a whole other topic. I have slides on mercury too. We produce mercury in Ohio, for you all to have.
We'll come up here and then we'll go to you.
What effect does our hands have on the safety of food?
Hands?
That's right.
Okay, hand washing. Well, I planted you because that's one of the most important things that we all can do and that you can watch your food service personnel do. And that's proper hand washing. How many seconds should you wash your hands? 20 seconds. Happy birthday to me, happy birthday. That's about 20 seconds, okay?
How important is it?
It's really important because aside from salmonella and Escherichia coli and some of these other, it's one of the leading causes of foodborne illness is a virus. It's Norwalk virus, and Norwalk virus is spread by contaminated hands. Because the only way, well, not the only way, but the 99% of the cases of Norwalk virus are caused by poor personal hygiene. Very, very important.
We'll bring the mic up to you.
Could you give us a brief list of what you would tell your daughter or best friend or something to do when she cooks or he cooks?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I have
Just in a nutshell,
okay.
please.
Wash your hands. If you're cooking meat, use a thermometer. And there is guidance on what temperatures your meat should be cooked to. Poultry needs to be cooked to 180 or greater. Beef needs to be 160. There's all kinds of guidance. You can find all that stuff online. So hand washing, temperature control. Do not use the same cutting board for potentially hazardous foods like tofu and something you're going to eat right away like a salad without doing anything further. So that's cross-contamination. So that's 3. 4, I'm going to give you 5. 4 is to watch the amount of time your food stays in what we call the danger zone. So the danger zone for bacterial growth, for it to enter that log phase, temperature-wise, 40 degrees to 140 degrees. So if your food is sitting for 2 hours or more in that danger zone, and room temperature is around 70, in that danger zone, you could be promoting log growth of bacteria. And then the fifth is when you go out to eat, go to the bathroom. And if the bathroom is clean, the kitchen's probably clean. So those are 5 things. How's that? Okay.
Other questions? We'll go right back here.
I would say the advice is really giving you, you should heed it. I was a head of fundraising for a U.S. Army for several years, and I can assure you that the health of your digestive system and the blood that's running through your veins is on a much lower priority list than the profits of large agricultural concerns, and that unless you are a congressman or a senator from a state that has very low agriculture, the moment you open your mouth, your phone is deluged with phone calls from lobbyists and these groups. I think you've been a little kind to this federal government, and it's really way past the problem stage. And our entire food system is in danger, and I think the health precautions here are, we should meet them.
Go ahead.
I was wondering what you thought of Michael Pollan and his books.
I love them. I read The Omnivore's Dilemma and read it several times, and I just love that book. Has other people read it? The Omnivore's Dilemma. And the thing I like about that book so much is that I picked up that book, I started reading it thinking, okay, when I'm done with this book, I'm going to definitely be a vegetarian. But he is not, he really tries to explain to you that you can't just have all of your food processed food, nor can we say we're going to make all of our own food. There's something, and that's the dilemma. There's some kind of medium. Some of our food's going to be processed, and then the reliance on corn too. But yeah, it's a really good read, very interesting, and I highly recommend it. How's that? Okay. Those are opinion questions I love.
Teresa, right in front.
You were talking about the tofu. My mom eats tofu all the time, so now I'm like wanting to know like what to tell her. When she cooks it, if it's out ahead of time, you said 2 hours, right? And then if there was some sort of bacteria when she cooks it, would that diminish any effects it would have?
Cooking, does your mom check the temperature when she cooks it?
I don't know.
Yeah, because remember the danger zone is 40 to 140, okay? 40 to 140. So most bacteria will not survive at temperatures 140 or above. That's why buffets and that's called the hot holding temperature. So if she's cooking it, she's checking it, make sure it's 140. Most bacteria, not all, most bacteria are going to be killed. Okay.
Well, let me follow up on that because it's a great question.
It is.
With melon, for example, the scariest foods. If you're going to a buffet, for example, you want to make sure they're under 40 degrees.
I never eat cut melon.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Never.
I would advise against it.
Here's the reason why you're like, well, how's melon get contaminated? Well, here's the thing about melon. And you know what? Why are we sick all the time? Right? Why are we sick all the time? Because of all these. Well, and this is based on microbiologists that study this stuff, and that's in the food code, which is a guidance document. Let me come back. So, cantaloupe, not honeydew so much, but cantaloupe has that kind of textured skin, okay? So if bacteria gets into that textured skin, and our cantaloupe is coming from all over the world, and how many of you wash your cantaloupe before you cut it? A couple of you do. So when you don't wash your cantaloupe and you run your knife through that cantaloupe, you're taking any bacteria that might be on the skin with you, okay? So then you cut it and you leave it sit out. And if it's sitting in that danger zone, that 40 to 140, and it's a couple hours, that bacteria and bacteria likes water. Our cantaloupe is loaded with water. It's not a high protein food, but it's got a lot of water. So that's the cut melon thing. I never eat cut melon when I'm in front of it. I just don't trust it. love.
Already, I can't even word it, can we get, develop a resistance to any of these things?
Can you develop resistance? You know what? I haven't looked at the research, but there is one that I do know of, and that's pathogens that get into raw milk. So if you are a farmer and you drink raw milk, all right, so you might not get sick from the raw milk on your farm, but if I went to your farm and drank your raw milk, chances are I would get sick because the people, their gut has built up some type of immunity to the pathogen. You know what the other flip side is? Salmonella is leading the way to antibiotic resistance. So salmonella is evolving, becoming resistant to the tools that we use to kill it. So bacteria are much more efficient at becoming resistant to things we do to them rather than to what they do to us.
Is it possible to get resistance to salmonella?
I haven't seen any evidence of that. Campylobacter is the one in raw milk. That's a different bacteria that there seems to be some, depending on if you drink it your whole life, grow up with it, you could be, I haven't seen the salmonella in years, I don't know.
I think, if we could, one last question or comment? Right back there in the library. First row. Thank you, Lauren.
There's currently a law being proposed before Congress in the name of food safety, which is partially sponsored by Monsanto, which will apparently have the effect of hamstringing farmers markets, community-supported agriculture, and the whole locavore movement. Are you familiar with that?
I am not, but I will become familiar with it.
Okay, now one second question that just came to me.
Okay?
Has anybody ever demonstrated or proven any harm coming from irradiating food for getting rid of bacteria?
Okay, so
Like
no,
neutron gas radiation.
Right. Yeah, I have not seen any evidence that suggests that eating irradiated food will make you sick. And I did research that for the book. It's a question you as an individual need to make that choice. What I advocate when it comes to things like that is that we should be able to know if our food is irradiated so that we can make that choice. And that you all should educate yourself. But I haven't seen any data, scientific data, that suggests that irradiated food is unsafe. To the contrary, I've seen a lot of data that suggests that you can eat raw hamburger, or rare hamburger, or eggs, or things like that, and be less concerned about bacterial contamination.
Well, I'm sure there's other questions you want to, and conversations you want to continue with Michele. I think in the last two presentations we had with Jesse and Michele, we really moved over into the policy issues. That's why, sir, your comments about legislators and the impact and effect, shall we use the term stranglehold, on effective policy maneuvers, that's a real dilemma that we have. When the potential for product and profit means more than human life. That's the situation we're walking into. But Michele has, as always, provided a very provocative, fascinating, and real